The good old clap, take one.
That's right.
How many of you knew what you wanted to be when you were 7 years old? I did. I wanted to be world champion.
Hey, is there honesty involved in this podcast? Can we be honest?
You can shut your fucking lips.
And then I just said, put them up, what? Let's go.
He's like, you look too pretty on the wave. Get ugly.
We can talk about DMT if you want.
I thought we were boxing.
All right, we have Jessi Miley-Dyer, former Championship Tour star turned World Surf League Senior Vice President of Tours and Head of Competition on the lineup. Jessi, thank you for joining us today. How you doing?
Good, Rosie. How are ya? Thanks for having me.
I'm good. Thanks for being on. Well, Jessi, we know how you are. Where are you today, and who are you with?
I'm in Australia, actually. I'm here in Sydney. I'm trying to go back to dominating the little shore area, Bronte and Bondi. I'm not successful as of yet, but I'm just here in Oz. How about you? Where are you?
I'm back home in California. I did a couple of days in Hawaii. It sounds like you did the turn and bird and went back home to Australia. I mean, when was the last time that you were home?
Oh, I mean, Australia's been tricky for all the Aussies, like expats overseas. It's been a long time since I've been in Australia, actually, but I'm pretty happy not to be doing the quarantine this time. I mean, it looks like I'm in quarantine from my background, but don't be fooled.
All is well and good. And Jessi, have you had a little surf in the Bronte shore break today?
Not today. I mean, it's actually been a fair bit of rain and just like a tiny bit put off by the cold, and there's a little bit of dirt in the water for sure. But I didn't surf today. I feel like I could have made up a session then for you, but I'm not going to. There is a good bank at Bondi though. Don't tell anybody.
Don't give out your secrets.
I know.
Well, Jessi, we're stoked to have you, and I'm Rosy Hodge, and this is a very special edition of the lineup. We're celebrating International Women's Day, and there have been so many incredible, influential women throughout the history of surfing who have paved the way for where we are today, and it is with much hubris that we'd like to thank all of you women out there who have pushed the sport and continue to inspire us in and out of the water. And with that being said, Jess, let's get to it. I think, we have like a little bit of a history together. I was trying to think about the first time that we pretty much crossed paths and how we met. But yeah, Jessi, you've just had such a long, illustrious journey with professional surfing, and it continues to blossom to this day. And, I was trying to think about where our cross kind of intersected, and I think it was almost like 2 decades ago that I remember meeting you and becoming aware of who you are. Do you remember the first time that we met?
Yeah, in Durban. In Durban, like it literally is 20 years ago, which is, I kind of feel a bit bad for you, Rosie, that we've known each other for so long. But I remember when we were in Durban, it was like one of the first times that the ISA World Junior Games had been like overseas in somewhere that the Australian team had gone to. It used to be Narrabeen, and it was the first time I'd met you. I'd met like Tammy Lee Smith the year before, and I don't think I'd met you yet, but I remember seeing you on the beach, because it was like this whole thing, because, I didn't know there weren't as many, young girls who were competing, and we were pretty young. Like I must have been 16, at the time. So to be overseas and meeting this whole group of us and I was there with Steph Gilmore as well. So it was like, I remember meeting you. I think Nikita Robb was there maybe. It was just like a whole bunch.
That's right. I think it was so... It's funny just for context, because I feel like, there wasn't, I think MySpace had just come about, but you're like on dial-up internet. So you weren't just like scrolling through Instagram, like getting to know like all these different surfers that were in the 4 corners of the globe. I remember like I was aware of obviously yourself and Steph, and it was like huge, like you said, for me to be standing on the beach and you meet all these international surfers, because that was just mind-blowing for us. Like you mentioned, those women from South Africa where we surfed, like we just looked up to you guys so much, because like we had international magazines coming to South Africa and they were always way too expensive to buy. We'd like kind of get them out of the cellophane wrap and like read them in the store really quickly and then shove them back in. So yeah, it's so funny because now today, like everyone's aware of everyone. There's little edits coming out with all the grams and the world feels a lot smaller due to like social media and just being able to fly all around the place. But definitely remember that first meeting, and it's crazy to think that was over 20 years ago.
It's so long ago.
And like I said, Jessi, it's crazy. Like
but we all ended up on the CT together. It was cool. It's cool. Like we were all there
pretty much at the same time. It's crazy how our lives can intercross. Even I think surfing just brings everyone together. And Jessi, I think we should go back though, because obviously before you got onto the circuit, everything leading up to that point. I mean, let's talk a bit about where you're from, where you were born, where you were raised.
Yeah. So I'm from the middle of Sydney. I'm from a little beach called Bronte, which is one of those beaches that, you know, the surf isn't amazing. I mean, look, let's be real. The surf's pretty bad, but we love it. You know, it was one of those like places that I just I hung out with my friends like all day long, and my mum would drop me down there with a bunch of my mates and we would just hang down the beach all day. And that's how we all grew up, you know, just surfing and hanging out in the surf club, that Bronte Surf Club, which became like a whole pastime in itself. But, you know, I've got two younger sisters who are twins and they surf, and my dad surfed. So I actually started surfing with him. My mum had taught me to swim when I was like 3 years old. So we kind of really just grew up around, you know, the water. You know, my grandparents had a pool, and it was like one of those things where, because I know you grew up swimming too, like it was one of those things where we hung down the pool forever. Like my grandfather did this thing where you would get a trophy when you could swim 10 meters of the backyard pool of backstroke and freestyle. You had to be able to swim like proper strokes and you'd get this trophy. It was the Colin Miley trophy for nothing, you know what I mean? But like for all the grandkids, it was a whole thing. And so my mum was like, you're going to get like, you know, that was like the whole goal. So that was my thing when I was like 3 years old, that I had that.
3 years old, no big
deal.
Yeah,
it says a lot about the family that we're all trying to learn how to swim.
Could do the individual medley at the tender age of 3. And, you know, that almost brings about another question. I mean, that competitive nature, do you think that's where that was born, like that family environment?
For sure. The family loves it. Like, you know, one of my memories when I was a young kid is everyone in my family would play Trivial Pursuit on holidays, and it was a nightmare, you know, like because there was always a couple of people in the family who were like really good at stuff, and so they'd be like, I want to be on her team, and you know, it became like a whole thing. Like my family just loves that, and we're really competitive, but in a way that's not like vicious, I guess. Like it's all in good fun. Like we're very happy to debate and muck around and like compete against things, and you can basically have whatever opinion you want. You just have to be able to back it up, and it can't be, you know, hateful or ridiculous. But the family is pretty out there for sure. And we all look the same, you know, like between my mum, dad, the twins, and my auntie, we all have this real kind of similar, like the genetics are strong, so people see us coming from a long way.
And the interesting thing for me there, though, is like saying wanting to be on her team. So do you feel like you're brought up with like a strong female presence in your family, and that's kind of, you know, like a solid foundation for where you kind of see yourself today?
For sure. Like we always say, my dad actually says it in particular, like if you met the rest of my family, people would understand, you know, why I am the way I am. Like my grandmother was like the really strong presence in particular. Like she really ruled the household, which was quite, you know, out there for you know, someone who grew up in another time. And but there's a lot of very strong female personalities in my family for sure, and it's very female dominated, and you can tell. You can tell when you see what everyone
well, thank goodness.
Is doing. Yeah.
Well, thank goodness, because that leads you down the path and where you are today, and obviously made a huge impact. And we are going to get to that later, but I think it's also important to just focus on that competitive history that you had, because you get into surfing at a young age, and thinking about, you know, your competitive rivals, your contemporaries at the time. Who were those people you were competing with in Australia?
You know, I grew up competing against Steph Gilmore because we're pretty much the same age. But apart from Steph, I also competed a lot against Rebecca Woods. And Rebecca Woods was also the first girl I'd ever met who was a surfer. You know, like I actually went up to her beach on the Central Coast, and when I was about 13 or 14, and she was in the water, and I remember being like very, almost like I don't even know what to do. I'd never seen another girl surfing, which is ridiculous because now when you look at it, the lineup's full of young girls, but you know, this is back in the olden days, Rosie, when we were kids, and I've paddled out, and I was like, oh, I don't even know what to say. But Rebecca ended up coming and speaking to me, and then we ended up going to a couple of different contests together. And she was a touch older than me, but you know, when you're in those kind of combined age groups, you end up competing against each other, and she was like a really great friend and rival for me for a long time. So it was probably really like Steph Gilmore, Rebecca Woods, and then, you know, Renee Hyman, when Renee used to compete as well. She was hanging around for a long time, and she's, you know, she didn't go on to surf on the CT. But the cool thing about, you know, Rebecca and Steph is that like we all grew up and competed together on the biggest stage.
Yeah, and that's Nev Hyman's daughter, right? The shaper.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I know, I can totally relate to you, because it did feel like there weren't, like I look around today and my mind's blown because there's so many girls in the water, and there's so many. It's just amazing to see how far it's come. And I just think about growing up in Australia for you. I mean, likewise for myself, I had a few people that I really idolized. We had Wendy, Botha, was from my same town. You know, she's a world champ, and I really idolized her. And I think you growing up in Australia, you almost had those same opportunities where there were women traveling and competing and achieving great things. Like, who did you really look up to? Who kind of influenced your surfing?
You know, this sounds really silly, but like I actually really loved Wendy as well when I was a kid, because I had this book, right? And this is going to sound ridiculous, but I had this little book that was about Wendy's life. Someone had given me. It was like one of those scholastic like book club things. And on the front, she was a goofy footer. And so I thought Wendy was a goofy footer for about 10 years, because it wasn't until I actually met her in real life, I was like, my mind was blown, because whoever had done this book had switched her stance on the front. But like I even when you know, when I was a kid, I had like the first custom surfboard I ever got. I actually went and like copied the spray that was on the front of her board on this book, with thinking that she was a goofy forever. So like the fact that I just assumed, you know, I've never told her that I thought she was goofy footed, because I was like, wow.
Well, it also probably broke your heart a little bit, being a goofy footer and finding out your hero is actual, like a natural footer.
Yeah, because goofy footers like love it too. And I was like, oh, I felt like an idiot. I was like, wow, I've missed this.
Well, I mean, you should have written to the publisher of that book and really
There's still time.
A letter of complaint. There's still time. No, that's so fun. I'm just like, yeah, it's insane, because I think one of the first times I met Wendy was actually at a WSL event at Snapper Rocks. And it was like I was probably in my 20s, and I'm like going up to this woman that I've grown up absolutely idolizing, like I said, and like I eventually got to her and I chatted to her, and she was like so down to earth and just so awesome, and just like pretty much the person that you would know, like traveling and surfing in the generation that she was, and like winning world titles, and like there was just this like energy about her, and she was really down to earth and everything, but you could tell like she wasn't like, she doesn't take crap from anyone, right? Like you could tell like she was like the solid presence.
Yeah. Wendy's just like, no. I was like, this is amazing.
It's not happening.
It's the energy we need in our lives.
Yeah, like I said, we idolize her for a reason. And then, Jessi, I think there's always that moment for us where, like, you know, you think about turning surfing into a career, and you kind of have that aha moment, like, okay, I'm going to do this. This is what I'm going to pursue. Do you remember that moment for yourself?
Yeah, like I did a lot of different sports growing up because, you know, I really enjoyed competing, but I had a lot of energy. My mum and my dad had me in all different things, like competing all the time. And I loved it. But and it was also, I always had like a couple of sports that I was kind of like pursuing in tandem, you know what I mean? And for me, the real kind of moment was in my final year at school when I was, we had like the ISA World Junior Games, you had the Australian titles, and there's always a couple of things that, you need to do well in or to win to go to your sponsors and try and get, some money to do the QS. And for me, I was running for Rip Curl at the time, and I had a couple of goals there. And then I'd also gotten a scholarship to go to uni, and we kind of sat down as a family and really talked about it between my mum, my dad, and, my aunties and grandparents who were still around at the time, because my family kind of talks things through together as well. And we all decided that, you can go back to college and you can always go back and do those things and have those opportunities as long as, you still continue to try and apply and, be willing to retest and things. But you may only get the chance to do something like that, never again, and that was the moment for us where we were like, well, you have a chance now to do the tour and you've got a seeding and you're going to get into these events. So, you should take it for, 2 or 3 years and see if you can qualify or see how you go, because when you're at the beginning of that process, and you would remember it as well, it seems like a really big mountain to climb to get to the championship tour. At the very, when you're starting coming out of juniors, it feels like you've gotten to the top of the junior series and then you start again. And so we kind of talked about it and we're like, okay, let's give it a proper go and see. And I think that I'd been watching the tour and we'd seen, we had the same magazines because Australia didn't really have many magazines either. And, you're reading like Wahine and things like that from the States and, watching the tour, and it just seemed like such a cool thing. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm going to try to do that.
Yeah, to me, that sounds like such a powerful moment too, to be sitting with your family who you respect so much. And obviously you've got 2 options that are amazing, like the scholarship to go to university and then the opportunity to travel and pursue your dream of being a professional surfer. But to have that family support and that push to be like, hey, Jessi, we believe in you, go chase this path. That must have been just like a powerful thing for you to propel you forward and motivate you to get to where you got on the tour.
No, for sure. One thing my parents used to say to me a lot is yeah, we have faith, we have faith that we have total faith in you being able to either achieve something or to do well or to, come out the other side. And the deal that we kind of cut in that conversation was that I promised that I would go back and do at my degree at some stage, but that it wouldn't be right now. It was very much okay, go and do this, but don't think you're getting out of, getting out of not going.
I bet you appreciate that though, because I find in surfing, sometimes you can be so one track minded and, it can be a really heartbreaking road, qualifying for the championship tour or not qualifying for the championship tour. If you've put all your eggs in that one basket and that dream doesn't eventuate, to have nothing to fall back on, to have your family to say hey, you need to be balanced. You've got to go back to school. Education is just as important as pursuing a professional athletic career. How important was that balance for you?
Well, one of the things it really allowed me to do is feel like I had a fallback plan or another option, because I think that what you're saying is correct, that there's so many people who, that go for careers in pro sports and, maybe fall a bit short. And it is important to have another option, and to feel like that you can do something else if you chose to, and I think that was the big key for me, was around having the choice to be able to do something that I loved, but also having the choice to make decisions around, another career for myself, potentially at some stage. And not that you're thinking that you're going to retire when you're 18, 19 when you're first starting to do the QS. But I wanted to, I did always feel like a bit, like safe's not the wrong word, right? But I felt good about the idea that I had thought about different things for myself, and that I thought that I would have another option and not so much pressure on the things that you were choosing at the time. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, totally. Like, it was a well thought out plan. You had your options, you knew what you were doing, and like you said, your parents always had faith in you that you were going to make those right decisions to see you succeed in whatever you chose.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, setting out on that qualifying series journey, I mean, how long did it take for you to qualify for the championship tour?
I did like my second year on the qualifying series. I qualified. Like, I didn't actually get into every single event that first year. So I did probably 3/4 of the tour, and then and then I got on the next year. And I feel like it would always take like one single kind of breakthrough event where people would, that you would, I felt like I accidentally won an event in all fairness. Like, I honestly, I feel like I accidentally won this event in Peru, and then I was like, oh, maybe I'm going to get on. Like,
I'm qualified.
kind of. And it was like the really early in the year, and I wasn't, I wasn't really expecting to do that well in the event, like I was sick at the time. Like, I feel like I used to go a bunch of places and get stomach sick everywhere I went, like, and would just end up throwing up everywhere, which became like a joke. And it's still a joke with the people I work with because I still do it. I don't know what's wrong with me. But like, and we're in Peru with an event that Sofia Milanovic had been the hero of and basically put on. And I feel like you were probably there too. And it was like the first time that I'd ever seen people just come out and support women surfing like that. Like Sophie had like, I feel like she had like 50,000 people on the beach cheering for her. And it was like one of the most amazing events I'd ever been to. And, but yeah, and then I actually like, it's I guess I didn't accidentally win, but I felt like I accidentally won. Pauline Menzer actually came down and like coached me through the semis and the finals, which was epic. Because she was just like,
what a legend.
Yeah, she was very much like, Gromit, I don't know what you're doing, but she's like, she started like really helping me. It was great.
Keep going.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think getting that little bit of support, I think, on tour, and like having the women, like those, especially the older women on tour, like gaining a bit of their respect probably meant a lot to you too.
Yeah, so because Pauline Menzer, she's from Bondi as well, and so I knew of her, but they were like, I knew her a little bit, and I'd come and travel to a few places with her as well. But she was, if there was an elder stateswoman for like surfers in Sydney, especially on this the south side of the harbour where I'm from, like it's definitely was Paul's. And she came down because when you get into those finals days, there's, and we see it now, there's more and more people asking for your time, and it was pretty hilarious at when you think back at it, but it was also really important. And I'll always remember Pauline doing that for me, because she came down and started just telling people that I wasn't doing interviews, I wasn't doing anything, like, and I had no idea what was going on. Like, yeah, totally. I was like, what do you mean? This is great.
Drink some water, Grom.
Yeah, exactly. She's like, you're going to go over here and study this surf break. And I was like, okay.
Go put some headphones in and watch the water and figure out where you're going to sit.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, you qualified. 2006 was your rookie year. In that year, you beat Lane Beachley at the Billabong Pro in Maui. You're winning a championship tour event in your first year, no less than beating, multiple world champ like Lane Beachley. Tell us about that experience.
That was really kind of surreal for me in some ways, because my first year on tour had been really up and down. The first events that I had gone to, and there were a few events where I thought that I would do well. It was like Cloud Break and Chopu, like being a goofy footer. There were a couple of places where I was expected to do better, and I pretty much just came last in a bunch of things in a row. And so I did really badly on all the reef breaks. And I was pretty devastated, actually, because I'd spent so much time trying to get onto the CT, and then the first like 5 events in a row I came last. And I was like, wow, like this is like, you know what it's like coming up against really seasoned competitors. I was like, I guess there's a chance here that I'm not going to requalify. And then we went to Brazil, where I wasn't expected to do very well at all in this tiny little beach break. And I made a final. So it like gave me this better seeding. But Maui for me, like Honolulu Bay was just one of those places that I always felt like fit my surfing, you know. And I was there with Kate Scarrett, who now is the high performance director for Surfing Australia. And she was coaching and caddying for me. Actually, no, Steph Gilmore caddied for me in the final, because I made this really major error and I took the wrong wave and I was in the final with Kiala Kennelly, and we turned around, and it was a year it had been massive too. Like the surf had been like really, really big. And so KK had done really well. And I turned around in like literally the last 10 seconds of the final, and she's on like this 8-foot Hawaiian wave getting barreled. And Steph, I remember really vividly, Steph locked eyes with me across the channel because she looked at me like really wide-eyed in that look that Steph has, where she was like, you like, you could see in her face, she was like, cool, wow, you just lost. You know what I mean? Like, and then KK fell. But I've never sat there and wanted someone to fall. And that was the first time, because I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Because it's hard making decisions. Yeah, I know. And KK still says it to me last time I saw her. She's like, I owe you a rematch. And I was like, no way. I'm never going back there to that moment.
No way, man.
That was the worst. Literally, my heart just sank because I turned around and as a grom, you know, like I was like 19, turned around, and I was at the brink of like the biggest win in my career, and, you know, which has remained by far the biggest win that I've ever had. And I really was like, oh, like that feeling when, you know, you make mistakes. It's almost a bit like if you've like fallen and broken your arm or something, and then you've got to go tell your mum that you've like broken something. It was like that. I was like, oh no. But
your heart just drops.
Yeah, it was terrible. And then KK fell, and I was like, thank you, Kiala. So KK, thank you for that. No. But no, it was cool. Like, and having Lane, you know, like Lane was such a big, she's such a big character for surfing in Australia, not even just women surfing, you know. So to be in the water with her after she'd won 7 world titles was like, it's pretty incredible. Because I remember looking at her and just being like, I can't even imagine having 1. You know, for her to have 7 was pretty epic. And she was, you know, and she was very like, she was on a high, because that's a massive thing. But I was terrible when I was a bit younger, and I do remember saying to her, because she was like, yeah, I'm going to win the event. And I said, no, you've already got 7 world titles. You don't need anything else. And she was just like, what? Like, but
I love that.
Yeah,
I love it.
But I had a lot of respect for Lane. Like I had actually, I traveled a tiny bit with her that year, and, you know, we'd gotten stuck in a few airports and things together, and she was a really interesting person for me to get to be on tour with and to learn from. Like to be on the women's tour in the midst of that like generational change. You know, I was at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And then I stayed on tour. My last year was 2011. So I got to see the beginnings of a bunch of people's careers, like Carissa, you know, like it's really cool to have had a front row seat for things like that.
Oh, totally. I mean, I feel the same way, like qualifying in 2007 and along with Steph. So Steph was caddying for you probably in what was going to be her qualification year. That's amazing. But just talking about, you know, 2006, you just saying that you were at the brink of like just this emotional roller coaster of that rookie season. You actually finished the year 4th place, your first ever championship tour, full year, rookie of the year award. I mean, thinking about the outcome of that season and the lofty goals that you probably had for yourself, and talking about the events that you thought you were going to do well, and just the journey. I mean, when you look back on that rookie season, what do you think your biggest lesson was?
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because you go into these, and you probably felt the same. Like you go onto the tour, and you have these goals, and then you kind of have to keep shifting them. And for me, I shifted my goals pretty quickly because I was like, wow, you really need to make a heat. Like you just need to walk some of this stuff back. But I think the big one for me is like I did a lot of work with a sports psychologist just because like I was really into that in general, but I found it really helpful. I always found that performance psychology really helpful. And the biggest thing that I took away from that year, and something that I still kind of hold really dearly, is the idea that failure is an option. You know, like I really believe strongly in that, like because we go into things that mean a lot to us, and we talk about, you know, success, but we don't always talk about failure. And the reality is that like there are mathematical chances that we're going to fail. So I found it really helpful that year to look in the eye the idea that I may fail in my, well, you know, what you would fail in commas, but the idea that I might fail in some of my goals in the year, and I might even fall off tour, and the idea of kind of reconciling that and thinking about what would really happen and how you would have to start again makes it seem not as scary, you know. So I've always really like analyzed those pieces really closely and come away and thought, okay, if it happens, it's not the end of the world, but failure is an option is for sure the biggest thing I took away from my first year on the CT. And it sounds almost a little bit, you know, it's not, it's a tricky one when you talk about it with people because it sounds a little bit like defeatist, but it's not meant to. It's just the idea that, you know, these things are possibilities for us, so that we have to take it into account.
Yeah, it's just that perspective that you gain from being on the tour. And I think you really have to walk it. Like you have to go to those events. You have to kind of go through your whole rookie season, because I can totally agree with you on that perspective. Because like for me, like I said, it was just this emotional roller coaster of your, you know, your surfing talent is one thing, but you even touched on it earlier with your story in Peru, where you going through a whole season and you, it sounds like traveling, having stomach bugs, like having to like physically be well enough to compete. Like there's so many factors that go into a full season on the championship tour.
Yeah, there really are. Like I think, and there's a few of us have had weird injuries, and I feel like I've seen you doing things too, like whether it's where you're staying that's tricky, or like I was always illness. Like one year I broke my nose really badly and I had to compete with it. And I just had like these giant black eyes, like you might even remember me. It was the year actually when you qualified and did well in Brazil, that event that got you on tour. Yeah. Not that I'm, you know, remember everyone's competitive results, but I had this my whole face was pretty much black, and I couldn't even like, I couldn't blow my nose or anything. I would have looked like a lunatic. But it's, you know, it's hard. I think, I mean, there was a year somewhere that you were staying in a wardrobe that I remember.
Yeah, I definitely traveled hard some of those years. And I feel like all of that was so character building. Like there were so many moments that were really hard, and like you're like, okay, where am I going to stay? I'm going to figure this out like as you go along. But yeah, there's like a lot of moments on tour that really challenge you. And like you said, it's for the better. Like you learn so much about yourself in those moments, maybe more so than the ones where you succeed.
Yeah. Yeah, you really do. And then you're like, oh, I can figure it out, especially when you're trying to make things up on the fly. Like the idea that, you know, things are not perfect all the time, because a lot of athletes, like competitive performance is based on routine. And sometimes you don't have the option, you know, because if something goes wrong, then you can't have this like perfect routine and you have to change it. I don't know if you found that, but I had to give up on it.
Well, you know, like the perfect routine is probably what you gave up on, but like readjusting your ideas of the reality of what it's like to be competing on such a big stage. But Jessi, you know, you spent, what was it, 6 years on the championship tour? 5-6 years on the championship tour?
Yeah, 6 years.
What made you decide to hang up the competitive jersey and get into the cubicle and you know, start an office job? What shaped that decision to retire from professional surfing?
You know, for me, my last year on tour, I didn't have any sponsors, so I kind of had a bit of a different, you know, and I had great sponsors. I rode for Rip Curl for my whole career, and then I had a bad injury, and my last year on the CT, I kind of was cruising around a bit, and it was great because I had a lot of fun, and it was like my final year in some stages of like just being able to experience it a bit differently. But, the real thing for me, honestly, was when I didn't requalify, and I had come really close on the QS to requalifying. Like I was probably like a heat away, and we're in the Azores, and I wasn't upset at all. Like I lost my heat and kind of went, and for me, that was the big thing, because I was like, I wasn't, this was something that I'd been doing for a long time and that had given me like so much and been such a big part of my life. And then I wasn't upset at all to have dropped off. I was like, oh, you could be done. Like, because I still loved surfing, but I was like, oh, like it's hard when you don't have that like real competitive fire. And for someone like me who's so competitive and had enjoyed competing so much, like I just felt like, oh, that for me was a real a red flag's not the right word, but it was very much like the flag on the field that I was like, okay, this like could be done. Shift. Yeah, totally. It was a real shift for me.
Yeah.
And, and I'd gone through phases of like, throwing surfboards and things like that. So it was a really big shift that I'd gone from, 1 year thinking I hadn't requalified and really considering throwing my entire quiver off of the cliff at Maui to like having actually not qualified and not being upset about it. And at the same time, I'd been on the board of the then ASP for a while, and Brody Carr, who was the CEO at the time, sent me an email and he was like, would you be interested in coming to talk about being the women's tour manager? So the combination of the two things for me, like the fact that I wasn't upset and that I didn't really mind the fact that I wasn't on, and then the fact that I had this other door that was potentially opening up, really seemed like to me it was all like meant to be in that moment, if that makes sense. I don't know what it was like for you when you decided to.
I can totally relate to everything that you're saying, because I feel like the same for me. Like, that drive and that passion to keep competing, like as soon as you feel that shift within yourself and you kind of see other opportunities start to present themselves and your focus kind of redirects in other directions, and you kind of like, you know what, like I've done this. I feel like I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. Like I got to travel, I got to experience this, I got to be on the championship tour. Like what else is there? Like, and pursuing other things. So yeah, for me, I feel like it was a very similar journey of just being, and then those opportunities coming my way to be like, okay, let's explore what it's like to get in front of the camera and do a bit of commentating at different events. So can totally relate to that. And Jessi, I want to know more about how, your job evolved with the WSL to where you are today. And we've got plenty more to discuss about our respective transitions within professional surfing. But first, we're going to take a quick break and get a word in from our sponsors. Yeah. So Jessi, we spoke about, your professional surfing career and transitioning into essentially an office job at the World Surf League, then ASP. Can you give us a little bit of, a brief history of, where you started, women's tour manager, to where you are today as the senior vice president of tours and head of competition at WSL?
Yeah, for sure. So, God, I don't even know where to start. Like, I feel like I started as the women's surfer rep, in all honesty. I was a women's surfer rep when I first, when I was actually a bit on the QS, and then when I was on the CT, I joined the ASP board as an observer, and I was there in the room kind of seeing how, to be honest, a lot of it for me was seeing how the business was run, but also advocating where I could for the women's tour and things that would have been beneficial to us. And it was really interesting. Like, there were a few things, and you would have experienced it as well. Like, there were definitely times on the women's tour at that time where it felt like, we weren't the focus. And I found that, being from this family of like really strong personalities, like I really wanted to be able to have a voice in the tour and when we're looking at events and where we could have other events, and even some of the conversations around license agreements when all of those championship tour events used to be licensed, was really interesting to me. So I was there for probably five years on the ASP board, and I ended up getting a vote as a director for the women, which was a really cool thing because I feel like that was something that I just couldn't let go of, that I was at the time the women didn't have a vote, but the men had two. So the men ended up giving me one after a couple of years, which was pretty generous, I thought. And also at the same time, I was like, yeah, we absolutely should have one because we're a massive stakeholder. You know, one of the conversations that we had at the time was, you know, because the women would be able to have a vote around things for the women's tour. And one of the first meetings that I was in, and I think that I really set the tone for like where I was going to stand, or just where my voice was going to be on a bunch of like matters, was, you know, someone who was pretty senior at the time who didn't work for the ASP said to me, you know, like when there's something that's going to be pertaining to the women's tour, you can come in and vote. And I was like, and they were like, you know, like the women's tour is really important, you know, and you know, we absolutely respect you. And I was like, cool. So if, you know, if the women's tour is very important to us, then, and to everyone who sits in all of the brands, like, then I would have thought that all ASP issues were women's issues, you know, and that was really, everyone was like, wow, she's going to be really annoying. But like, I believed really strongly in things, and, you know, and it was just the way I had been brought up that you would, you know, be able to say these things. And if you could back it up and be willing to put your case forward, that's something that would be totally acceptable. And there were a couple of people at the time who really helped me when I was on the board, you know, and this is a really long time ago, you know, so, but the idea that all ASP issues were women's issues were something that for me as the women's surfer rep, that was really important. And I truly believed it, you know, so I ended up, spending years on the board, and it was a really interesting time for me because I learned a lot about the business and how it was run. And this is the business of the ASP. So there's a very different structure to what it is now. And, you know, a lot of those ideals are very, you know, they're very outdated. But it was just interesting to see, as someone who, like, I really love to have the information around things, like, and I love to know why things are the way they are. And even if I don't agree with it, like, I just want to know why. And so the years that I spent there on those committees and things, they were very, really, really interesting because it gave me a really good kind of cross section of how of the state of the surfing industry more broadly, and the place of women surfing within it, you know. So I took all of that kind of knowledge, and when Brodie Carr at the time had offered me the job as a women's tour manager, and it was a role that I took because it seemed like that seemed to me like it was the best of both worlds, you know, and it was a really, really big opportunity for me just in terms of being close to something that I loved and like something I was very passionate about in like the women's tour, but also, you know, allowing me to retire and not compete, because there was this voice in the back of my head that was very much like, your time is done, and this isn't something that you should be pushing. And you know, I think that a lot of athletes have that voice, and it's hard for us to listen to it because sometimes the things that you love are not things that are good for you anymore in some ways. Like, I loved surfing, but competing wasn't great. It wasn't like a good thing for me to be doing because I was getting really frustrated. So for me to be able to stand to move sideways and to work on the tour was like a really, like, to me it felt like a bit of a light bulb moment in some ways, because, you know, I'd been on the board and I'd been floating around in all of these committees, but for me to have a like a solid role at the then ASP and be able to actually work on the inside and to try and to make some things happen for the tour was like that's a really cool thing for me to have been able to do.
Yeah, I mean, really just looking at your position and thank you for being that powerful voice, because what we're seeing, the change that we've seen happen over the last decade is really truly owed to women like yourself really stepping up for our sport. And you know, in my mind, it seems to me like it's ticking all the boxes for you, right? Like you still get to keep your hand in professional surfing. You get to voice, you know, what you see is a bigger opinion and a bigger matter to push women's surfing in the right direction. And then also coupled with the fact that like you were going university wise, like thinking about a business degree for yourself. So that really was kind of, you know, maybe competitively that was aside, but your next sort of passion, your next step in your career. So talk to me about, you know, going to university. What part did school play in all of this?
I went to New South Wales Uni, and there's an elite athlete program there, and it's one of Australia's like really, it's like a big uni here in Australia. And so what they have is they have this program where it's not necessarily online, but like you would go in to class when you were there, and if you weren't there at the time, you would take your work away and like work with your different professors and things. And I really enjoyed being at uni because I've just always enjoyed being able to learn different things, but also like it was really interesting for me to have like some formal kind of education in ways of thinking about some of the changes that we could make. You know, because sometimes when you're in these roles, some of it can be admin heavy. And, you know, if you have some of the theory behind you as to why things are the way they are or the way that things can be, it can be more powerful when you're presenting something. And that for me was like a really big one at uni, because I learned about the back end of you know, like structure and corporate structure and just bits and pieces like that. And I spent, you know, I ended up being at uni for a really long time, but because I was doing it part-time, and then, you know, I did my my master's degree, but it was, you know, like it's really like it was one of those things that took me a very long time to complete, but like I actually think that that's one of the hardest pieces that I've ever done, you know, like to finish my master's degree in business, like. And when I was just completing it, I was literally like, there was a part of me that was like, I can't believe it's really here that I'm actually going to graduate, you know, like, and it was hilarious because my mum, at my graduation, my mum framed my diploma on the spot because she was like, yeah, like this is going in a frame, because the whole family, yeah, for sure. And it sounds silly, but the whole family just saw like the blood, sweat and tears that went into it. And and like, you know, things like that become like a bit of a team effort, because people have to see your stress levels going up and down. And you know, one of my sisters was somewhere and was just like looking at me going, I don't know what you're trying to do here. I was like, no, I'm going to do it, you know, because there was some bad, there were a couple of days when I was, you know, on event sites. And there was one day in particular I had to sit on an event site of ours to use the internet, because I knew the internet would be better. And I was sitting on the event site until like 11 o'clock at night, finishing something that I had to hand in like before 12. And the security guard was like, what are you doing? I also did a few accounting exams on the beach in Brazil. Because there's like, you know, online quizzes, and the exam comes on for like, you know, an hour and a half. And I was in Brazil and we were running at a backup site and I had to do it. So I'm sitting there watching the contest, doing something else, and I'm taking this exam. And I remember Graham Stapleberg, who still works for us, looked at me and he was just like, what are you doing? And I'm like, you need to just leave me alone for a second. I was like, or you can help me. Yeah, fully. No, I was like, so, but no, it was, you know, it was good for me to have a different way of thinking, you know. That was one thing that I genuinely really found helpful for uni, because I think that there is a place for formal education in terms of like having you consider points of view in different ways, if that makes sense. But I'm like a terrible offender of like doing a lot of things all the time, you know, like and it's almost like the more things, like my mum always jokes because she's always like, you're always doing some other thing as well, you know, and there's a lot of pieces like that I'm not even sure what's driven. Like I'm like, well, I don't even know what's driving this, but I always have some other project in the background, you know, and I think uni was that one of those for me for a really long time. It was like this other thing that I could focus on, and I would switch on and off of whatever else I was doing. But it becomes, it was definitely wasn't like easy.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with being so ambitious, and what an asset to have someone that's kind of walk the talk, and then along with that has a master's degree in business, kind of helping run the show. So, I mean, that perspective just is insane. And thinking about, you know, what we've seen in the last decade, Jessi, as you've come on and as this role has evolved for you, and thinking about the women's tour specifically, I mean, tell me about the changes that you've seen, I mean, in the last decade, and that have really been so hard fought.
I mean, there's so many things that the women's tour have, that the women's tour has benefited from the acquisition of the then ASP, you know, and the changes that the WSL has made, and like our ownership group in particular, like actually, you know, really has always focused and cares about the women's tour, which is a big one. But like, you know, even starting from, you know, the year that I retired, we our last event was in July. And even then it was like something that was just pieced together. Like the women's tour was really, you know, we didn't have many events. The prize money was very low. The QS was, you know, a disaster. And, you know, it was just more like the focus, and not even like looking at, you know, some of the places that we would go to surf, and, you know, they're all events that tried really hard for us and like, you know, did the best that they could. But, you know, the men would be, you know, somewhere like, you know, Tahiti, and then the women's tour would, you know, be somewhere else. So the fact now that we're there, we've like brought up the prize money to be equal. This year that we've got the equal venues is a really big one too, I think, because a lot of the times the equal venues also speaks to, you know, the focus on the tours, and the fact that, you know, everyone's going to be watching these women's events because they're not, you know, they're not standalone events. You know, before, when you have women's events somewhere else and the men's tour is somewhere else, that, you know, just by the nature of sports and the history of, you know, sports in general, like people will gravitate to the men's tour because, you know, for a long time in like, you know, just popular culture, like the default position around sport has been men's sport. So the fact that now that we have this focus on women's sport, and we have so many great athletes as well on the women's tour, you know, like people who really, you know, are outstanding individuals, and there's interest in those women as well, in a way that I think that there wasn't before, you know, that I think that, you know, when you look at some of those past champions of the sport, they didn't have these followings that we have, that we're seeing for some of the young women that we have on tour. And like, people are legitimately very popular, and they're popular because they're athletes, you know. And I think that is a really big one for me as well, that, you know, all of the things that we've done at WSL to invest in the women's tour and the women's platform have seen, you know, this, not only this generation of women who have, you know, followings and people know who they are because, you know, we're going to great waves and showcasing them in their best conditions. And we have like this amazing broadcast with experts like yourself, like who are there speaking to the women's tour. But we also, you know, have this next generation too, who are looking at the women's tour and seeing women surfing as like a viable option for a sport. And that for me is almost just as important, because, you know, you see so many, like Sierra Kerr is actually a really good example. You know, she's an amazing skateboarder and an amazing surfer. And one of the things I've said internally a lot, but I say, you know, I'm happy to say it externally as well, is that like I fully believe that women surfing is like a viable career path, and I absolutely hope to lure some of these young girls away from other sports because, you know, because of everything that we stand for. You know, if you have the chance to be considering a career in like snowboarding or skateboarding or surfing, then my viewpoint and my hope is that young women and their parents will look at surfing as like the first option, because of everything the WSL's doing and all of the investments that we've made in the women's platform and in prize money and in caring about the tour. You know, that's my hope for sure, and that's my kind of vision, I guess, for this next generation. Like that people would want to be a part of surfing, and it's not something that people like, oh, I guess I'll be a pro surfer. It's like something you'd actively pursue, you know?
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight into the motivating factor for you because, you know, I concur. Like you're looking at someone like Sierra Kerr, like you said, she's an amazing skateboarder, golf. You know, she's got so many facets where she could choose either career path, but it does seem like her whole passion is surfing, and that's really where she's headed. And I'm sure she's looking at the championship tour now and just like so excited about the possibility, of making it, you know, her career and how it's going to take shape. And it's funny you mentioned Sierra because I just remember her dad Josh Kerr and her mom Nikki bringing her down to the Snapper Rocks event when Josh was a rookie on tour, and she was probably only a couple weeks old. So it's funny to watch someone grow up in this environment, but also to see, you know, from that rookie year of Josh. But now I'm sure Josh is looking at his daughter Sierra and seeing this viable career for her, and just like how many doors have opened up in that time. And Jessi, I mean, when you look back now, like you mentioned, we've got equal pay across the board for the women, you know, combined championship tour events. The women are going back to places like Tahiti. The women are competing for the first time at Pipeline. You know, such groundbreaking movements for women's sport. Like when you look back on what's been achieved, what do you think has been one of your proudest moments?
You know, I think my proudest moment probably was Eagle Prize Money for sure, because like that, there's just so much wrapped up in that, and there's so much, you know, for so many women who came before, like the feeling of value that's you know placed on your prize money, and the fact that WSL would really publicly put an equal value on women's performances and their skill level and talent. That was a really big one for me, and it's probably, to be honest, that's probably the thing that I'm most proud of in my whole career. It, like, nothing will ever, you know, there's nothing that I could have ever won as an athlete that would ever make me feel more proud of us in that moment, and something, you know, as well that I know that I'll never benefit from, you know, because I'm a long time retired and have no desire to ever really compete again, and even in the Masters. But like, you know, like that I got to have a hand in that and to work on Equal Prize Money for the next generation of kids is something that I'll always take with me for sure, because that's just so important for young girls to know that, like, that the sport values them equally, even if they didn't, you know, they don't feel like they get as many waves, or, you know, it's hard when you're a young girl in the lineup. I certainly didn't get many waves when I was a kid. So it's a really powerful statement from us. And it's something that I think that's a big one for me. And then if I had to pick another, like a second kind of moment though, it's Pipeline for the women. And the fact that we would be a Pipeline and have those permits, like the changing face, even, you know, when you see Instagram, when you look through Instagram, and this for me too is like a really strong kind of barometer, is like, you know, that all of those young women who've been now posting edits of themselves getting waves at Pipe is in some ways like the biggest, it's almost like the biggest validation for the decision for us to be going to Pipe and breaking open that lineup to include the women, you know, because there's this whole generation of young girls who are going to be competing there and surfing there and just never thinking that it wasn't for them. You know, like I've seen Erin Brooks out there a lot. I even saw Sky Brown surfing out there. And, you know, when we were there last year and we got the okay to finish the event from Maui there, like there were a few young girls who paddled up to me in the lineup just down the road at Rocky Point, and they were like, you know, I've been surfing a Pipe, like, you know, the fact that I would have young girls then telling me that they're going to surf there, and they were like, oh, this is going to be amazing. Like, that's a really big one for me too, because it says that they're taking notice, you know, of the decisions that we make at WSL, and they understand how important it is, you know, like the fact that that pipeline is going to include women now for years to come is like a really big one.
Yeah, it was huge. And I think, I don't know, just the feeling of watching the women compete there for the first time and seeing, you know, them tackle that wave and just cracking open, like you said, just cracking that place open and really letting the lineup fill up with these young girls that have these aspirations to become pipeline specialists and to really fill a spot in the lineup was powerful. But just getting back to the equal pay, I mean, the process to get to that moment, I'm sure that was also a long road. Can you tell us about, you know, it didn't happen overnight. So what went into the process of getting equal prize money?
I think like the first piece in equal prize money was like bringing up the women's levels to just be a bit better than they were, you know, like the first, you know, I only ever won a single event on the championship tour and I made $10,000 and I thought I was killing it. Like I really did. I was like, this is a massive amount of money. Like someone's paying me to go surfing. This is the best decision I've ever made. And then like when you see, you know, Caroline Marks was the first to ever win one of our championship tour events, and she won like 10 times that. And it was so cool to see it because like to get up there is a massive, you know, it's a massive step. And for us, it was a combination of, you know, raising the prize money, but then it was also, you know, a little bit more holistic when we were looking at the women's tour, because it was prize money, but it was also the venues and bringing back a few venues for the women. Like Honolulu Bay was one that we brought back pretty kind of early in the piece with the acquisition, and trying to, you know, trying to stabilize the women's platform was a really big one too. Absolutely.
Yeah. Also thinking about, I mean, I'm really stoked to see, I think for me, watching the women compete for the first time at Jeffreys Bay, seeing them surf super tubes, that was like huge, like so big. And putting myself in the shoes of like the young grommets watching that moment happen, like just, I was like, wow, if I had been here watching this unfold, like for me, what that would have meant. So, you know, creating that platform and seeing the women's profiles grow has just been insane for us. And you know, Jessi, by the time this episode comes out, we'll be just beginning our third CT event of the 2022 season. And so far, things have already got off to an incredible start. Jessi, let's reflect back on a momentous first event, not only for the WSL, not only for the history of women's surfing, but for the surfing world in general. Talking about the Billabong Pro pipeline, you know, you already touched on just how amazing that event was. But when it's all said and done, I mean, standing at the shoreline at Pipe, having those first few heats run, I mean, talk to me about that moment of calling the women's competition on and just the event in whole.
I think for Pipe, for us having the women's CT at Pipeline and starting the year there is like, you can't even underestimate the symbolism, I think, of things like that, you know, and watching, you know, so many people come down and so many young girls coming to watch that event, you know, women's finals day in particular, like, you know, as we'd made the call and put the call out on social, we watched, you know, I stood up on the deck and I could watch all of these young women coming down to view the comp. And that's like a real change, I think, in seeing, you know, there's so many young girls coming down and to watch their heroes, and everyone got waves. Like, I think there was a lot of people who came up to me and were really surprised in some ways that the women could surf pipeline. And it's, you know, it's things that we know, you know, and it's one of the pieces too around the women's tour that, you know, when we look at how things are done now and how it's changed, is that, like, you know, people like you and I know that women can surf these places, and maybe people have just never seen it. And that's why, you know, when you see some of those standout performers and some of the performances that we've had, like, they become really powerful on the platform of WSL with, you know, everything we put behind it and our broadcast team, and, you know, even having someone like Kelly Slater come on and speak to the women's finals, you know, that's really important. And to me, I love it when Kelly comes on, because it's like, he's the greatest surfer of all time, and he's watching the women's event and he's paying attention and you know, and talking about, you know, tactics and things like that. And it's like, yeah, like, you know, if Kelly Slater's watching, you guys should too. Like, you should know who these people are if Kelly does. You know, there's something really cool about that when Kelly comes on and understands like the ins and outs of who's doing well and who's been, you know, performing out there and training out there. Because to me, more than anything, it says that he's paying attention and that he's taking notice. And I love that. Like, I love that for the women's tour that he would, you know.
Yeah. He was so invested in that final. I mean, Carissa Moore, you have the 5-time world champ, the gold medalist, the Hawaiian, like, absolute queen. And then Moana Jones-Wong, I mean, a wild card, Jessi. She's obviously a pipeline specialist, dedicating herself to that place. But that final was just, like you said, having Kelly call it and have him being so invested in the whole result and watching the woman in awe, that was just beautiful to witness that. But also, like you said, like leveling up the women's tour, having events at Pipeline, having events at G-Land, Tahiti, you know, all of that is so important. But what went into making those decisions to have the events in G-Land, Tahiti, Pipeline, Sunset Beach?
I think like the return of the women's tour to Waves of Consequence is an important one for like the continued progression of the sport and for the continued like narratives of us like pushing the limits and you know, pushing women surfing for as far as it can go, because, you know, these waves that we're like listing, they're really, you know, they're like the most dangerous waves in the world, but they're incredible. And for us to go there as a group and to start to, you know, a lot of people have had more time in the water there, I think, than others for sure. But the idea that we'll be there and we're there like trying to, you know, get better in these waves, I think is really important. Like, it's an important one for us as we look to continue to push the limits for the women's tour, you know. And one of the cool things too, I want to say with going to these places is like having the men, you know, beyond even just Kelly, like supporting all of the women and watching the women's event. I know a lot of the boys were watching Pipe in particular. And it's cool to see the support, I think, and even just to see people watching, because you probably remember that the women's and the men's tour seemed very separate when we were on. You know, there was some mixing, but people weren't really, you know, people weren't down there watching. And then you have some of the guys who are there, they'll go down and lend a hand, or they'll be watching, like actively watching the women's event. I think it's like a really big shift.
No, totally. I agree. I mean, we even had Jack Freestone, a former championship tour competitor, that was, you know, coaching and helping Courtney Conlog in the Sunset event. And just seeing, like you said, there's that equal respect. It definitely feels like the tour as a whole is just this traveling family, and the respect given from both sides is definitely felt. And, you know, for that Pipeline event, we have to say a huge congratulations to Moana Jones-Wong for taking the victory, making history in the process. And of course, we can't forget about our runner-up, Carissa Moore. It was a huge event. And, you know, transitioning from Pipeline, going to another wave that is so entrenched in, you know, the Hawaiian history and our surfing in general, thinking about the Hurley Pro Sunset Beach presented by Sasado, talking about the diversity of the women's tour, looking at someone like Brisa Hennessy, who won that event for Costa Rica, the first time that someone has won a CT for the nation of Costa Rica. I mean, that moment is huge in itself.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, it speaks as well to like the continued kind of talent that we have in surfing, you know, and so many people not only coming up the ranks, but, you know, women from Costa Rica. Like the fact that Briss is going to be the first to have ever won, I think that's awesome. And she like even beyond you know, Bristol, like when we look at all the rookies who did well there, like it was an epic event for the women's tour. And there's so like much, there's so many great things happening, you know, for them. And there's so many cool like stories and talent. Like, you know, you look at the rankings right now and you probably wouldn't think that you'd see some of those big names, you know, who are in a spot that are not qualifying. So for Brissa, you know, Brissa's coming into Portugal, she's going to be the world number one. And that's epic. Like, that's such a cool thing. Like, I mean, she surfed so well during that event. And, you know, between her and, you know, Moana and Carissa, you know, even Barron, you know, coming through and doing so well, like I think the whole Hawaii leg was pretty epic.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And I do want to touch more on just the rookie class. There's so many topics. Also the tour cutoff that's going to happen after event 5 Margaret River. Like you said, the rankings have had a definite shakeup, but we do have to get in a quick break to get a word from our sponsors. So hang on with us and we'll be right back. Jessi, this season is shaping up to be one of the best in the history of our sport. Let's talk about the evolution that we're seeing right now, because we have 5 exciting rookies. All of them made the quarterfinals or better in the last event at Sunset Beach. Yeah, let's just touch on the fact that we've got this young crop of women that are shaking things up, because for the last decade, we've had 3 women really have a stranglehold on the world titles. You got the Steph, the Tyler, the Carissa Moore. So what are you making of this shakeup?
It's pretty cool. Like, one of the things that I really see from these young kids is like that they're not afraid at all to take on the big names, you know, and I think that's like a real... It's such a strength for them to be there and be like unafraid and not intimidated. It's almost like the most important thing. But that's the thing that really strikes me with this group of young women coming on, is that they're unafraid to take people on. Like, you saw, like, even Molly took down Carissa Moore. Like, we saw huge performances from Luana and Gabby Bryan, you know, even India coming back after skipping pipe, and like everyone's doing so well. Like, Betty Lusakura is killing it, like taking people down left, right, and center. And like, if you go through and look at all of the ages, and like, even to be honest, like the competitive kind of history for some of them, it's not like they've been, you know, they're pretty young. So it's not like they've been competing against these huge names for years and years and years. And that to me is like a really big one, because it's the biggest stage in the sport. And they're taking on the very biggest names, and they're like performing. And not only are they performing, but they're like killing it. So it says to me like a lot around the kind of like headspace that these young girls are in, and it's cool. Like, I love that they're there and just like taking everyone on. Yeah,
that self-belief and that confidence is huge. And I think, I mean, in my mind, like, I knew of most of the women that got onto the tour this season. Like, you kind of had them in your peripheral. But then I think about someone like India Robinson, like you kind of touched on it. And I'm like, wow, this girl looks so familiar. Like, where have I seen her before? And I think back to like Bells Beach events where, you know, all of the championship tour surfers have these caddies that kind of take their boards down the steps and like watch them for them. And I'm like, wow, I think I saw on Instagram from you, but this woman has been caddying at these events. I mean, Bells Beach has been held for over 50 years. That Rip Curl event is synonymous with our sport. But yeah, it's just been so fun to watch the rookies this season. Like I said, India being a board caddy and obviously just quietly absolutely shreds. And now she's on the championship tour making quarterfinals in her rookie season.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it kind of speaks to it too. Like, everyone has these, you know, a few, not everyone, but like there's quite a few young women who will come down to our events and watch or caddy. Someone like India who's been caddying for a long time, and they've like got to see the, you know, the big show. And I think there's something that's really powerful in that, in being able to come down and watch an event and see it in real life. And just to be able to see your heroes, you know, there's something that's really special about getting to meet your heroes and getting just to say hello.
Yeah, and having a glimpse, like you said, of a competition happening in real time, and just having that experience. And, you know, thinking about the progression of women surfing, obviously we're seeing so much more, like, just the young talent with the aerial maneuvers. I mean, last year, what Carissa was able to achieve at Newcastle, that air that she was able to pull off against Joanne DeFay, probably one of the biggest in competition. Speak to me about the progression that we're seeing in women surfing.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. Like, someone like Carissa has always really held that torch. I think like that air that she did was like unbelievable. But and that's one of the coolest things too, is that like getting people to do those maneuvers in the jersey, I think is really important. And it's something that I love to see, because I love to see people doing these kind of tricks, like not only in our events, but also like in those pressure situations, like to be there and be pulling something like that. And you could see the look on her face where she was just like, wow, I can't believe I can't believe that I pulled it off. Like there's something when you're like, well, like she's basically trying to do something she's never done in a contest, and that's a next level move for sure. But like, I mean, when you see some of the airs that some of the young girls are doing, like this next generation, like they're scary. Like it's almost scary. Some of the size and like their technicality in the air is unbelievable. And like, I know that there's a lot of people on the tour who are, not really looking over their shoulder, but like just half looking because they know they're all coming. And, some of the stuff like we've all seen everyone's Instagram clips, like Erin Brooks is just like Sky Brown's doing massive airs in the pool too. So like I'm excited.
Do you think that's the next aspect of women's surfing that's going to improve, along with probably pushing themselves in waves of consequence?
Yeah, I do. I really do think that we're going to start seeing some of these airs in the jersey more and more often, and I'm excited about it. Like I really am, because we see so many of them doing these airs, like just in on Instagram. And for me, when people do it in the jersey, it's like that's the most kind of exciting. So I'm definitely I'm living for some of these like young talents to come on and just the first woman to do a backflip is going to be my hero for the rest of my life, I think.
Oh yeah,
it's coming.
It's coming. It's like they're knocking. It's coming. It's knocking. It's like just headed in that direction at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And thinking about Jessi, this episode will air on Tuesday, March 8th, which is International Women's Day in the US. And as part of that celebration of International Women's Day, you're also announcing the return of WSL Rising Tides. It's a grassroots girls program. Jessi, can you tell us about this program and what it means to you to see it return?
Fully. So, I mean, look, it's no secret that I love Rising Tides and how important it is to me, like for, WSL Rising Tides, for one of the things that we announced as part of our equal prize money announcement a few years ago. And like the return of it is so cool because it's something that so many people ask me about. But more than that, like WSL Rising Tides is really like a cornerstone for us of the values of the league. And, like to be able to provide young surfers like access to the world's best and a platform to explore and like learn from your heroes and to be able to pursue your dreams like in the water or maybe just around contests. And that's a really big one for me, like even to be able to create a connection with the tour, like. And I'm sure you probably have a similar experience to me in that, one of the things that really drives some of the conversations for me personally around Rising Tides was just being able to go to a championship tour event for the first time and get to meet people. Like I have this photo of myself and Lane Beachley and I'm like 11 and I was so excited to meet her. And it was at the Coke Classic in Manly in Sydney where I grew up. And my parents had taken me over to watch and like I even have these ridiculous photos and my mum has them where I've been surfing near Lane. So I have these photos of me in the same lineup and then I've gone and stalked her down and taken the photo. But like I treasure that photo because I to this day I remember getting able to meet her and even just to say hello and say something like nothing. Like I remember every single word she said. So like for us to have the opportunity to do that on a formal basis with all of the young women who surf in the area and to get to come down and meet their heroes and say hello, like there's something really magical about getting to meet the people that you admire. And more than anything, like it makes your goals feel tangible and it makes the people that you've been looking up to seem like, like real humans and not just this person that you've been idolizing through a computer screen or the TV. So I love Rising Tides for that reason, like because, we have all of these young women who are going to come down and my secret desire, and not even secret, is that one day, in the future, we're going to have world champions who would have come down to Rising Tides and they'll have these photos but it won't just be at a random contest site. It would have been something that they got to come through us, I'm sure you've got a photo with a surfer where you just look like
no.
you just look like the biggest grom ever. Yeah, I look ridiculous. And you can tell that I'm like 11 because like my hair is just like ridiculously everywhere.
Frazzled.
Yeah, but I look like the naughtiest kid as well. Yeah. But like that was so important to me, like to meet Lane. And I still have this photo and it's ridiculous, but I love it. And it meant so much.
It's so relatable. No, it's so relatable. And I think just on that part, the subject of the rising tides and just creating that space for these young girls to stand and be in awe of their heroes and go surfing with them and just interact with them is so important. And thinking back to the rising tides that we saw at Jeffreys Bay, like I said, that had a huge impact on me, seeing these young girls go down. And it wasn't just, these well-known rising stars from South Africa that came to hang out, on top of that you included those women, but then there's also people from underserved communities getting to come and do that, and how that really shifts their reality and will push them in a direction of just positivity to chase after surfing as a profession, like you said. So it does create just such an amazing opportunity for these young women, but then also on the flip side of that, for the athletes themselves to know, like, there's something about feeling like you've like connecting with people, and like to hear people say that they look up to you, that's like super heartwarming and probably like inspiring and motivational for them. I mean, watching Steph and watching anyone on the top 17 interact with these young girls is so special. So Rising Tides is just such a cool initiative, and on either side of the fence, whether you're participating or whether you're one of the championship tour surfers going out with them, it's a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, and like you say too, like a lot of Rising Tides as well is around access to these lineups, and the first one that we ever did at D-Bar, we took over the whole lineup, and one of the young girls said to me, like, I've never seen so many women out the water at D-Bar on the Gold Coast, and I've never been able to just have young girls in the surf. Like, you're always getting hassled by someone else, and it becomes really important when you places like J-Bay and having people from underserved communities coming into these lineups and getting to have a it's in some ways it's like having a taste of being able to be there, but more than anything it's like making sure that they have a place in being able to paddle out there, because it's it's really hard.
Yeah, no, totally. Creating that space for everyone is so important. And, in celebration of International Women's Day, Jessi, we want to know, who are you inspired by, past, present, and future, and why?
Oh, God. God, I don't even have a good answer. I mean, I was always really this sounds really lame, but I was always really inspired by my family a lot, because I had, women in my family who were doing things in areas that they probably, were pretty out there. When I was a young kid and when I was surfing, I didn't have many women in surfing to look up to, which is kind of, I think in some ways, like I ended up in this place where a lot of the things that were really important to me kind of just were really influenced by everyone around me, but it wasn't like a specific person, which is why I think now when we have things like initiatives around International Women's Day in surfing, it's almost like doubly important, because I remember that there wasn't that visibility for so many women in the industry, and we didn't know who everyone was. And so the fact that we'll have people talking about women in surfing, I think is really cool, because you would know who people are from afar, but without we're dating ourselves, but without the internet, without you're relying on certain pieces of media and magazines and stuff like that, and the fact that they didn't always exist. It makes these things really important, and it really makes you think. It makes you realize how important it is to have that visibility for women in the sport, I think.
Yeah, No, I totally agree. Like just having that important influence and having somewhere where you draw that inspiration from, no matter like what it is, how it influences your life is.
You know, this sounds really lame, but when I was a kid, I loved Susie O'Neill. I thought she was so cool. But she was a swimmer, you know, and swimming in Australia is such a big sport. And she was, you know, she was a huge name in swimming at the time. And because I was in all of these other sports as well, like that's one thing that I really always think about, because I didn't have, you know, you didn't have those like really visible role models within women's surfing, like because you didn't have the access. But you know, watching Susie O'Neill, like the Olympics came to Sydney in the year 2000, and I went and watched a bunch of the swimming live, and I'll always remember it because it was like one of the most amazing things that I'd ever been able to see. And like when you get to see people, you know, that you've been watching from afar on TV in real life, like winning gold medals, it was a huge, you know, it was a huge moment for me as a kid. But like you didn't have that for surfing, you know, which is why like now we're in the Olympics, and there's so many, you know, there's so many great things that are happening for the tour. Like hopefully instead of watching Susie O'Neill, there's going to be the kids somewhere, and they're going to be they would have watched Carissa Moore win a gold medal, you know, like those moments are really important.
They are, for sure. I mean, even reflecting on the 2000 Olympics, you're probably a young teenager, but you actually got to be a torchbearer in the opening ceremony. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. I brought the torch into Bondi. It was pretty cool. We still have the torch, and I always threaten that I'm going to bring it out to like light barbecues with or something. But I think
you should.
Yeah, I know. I never do. One day.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on. We've got some Instagram questions. Each episode, we post questions from the Instagram community at the Lineup Pod on Instagram. And this episode was no exception. We got heaps of questions, but we've narrowed them down to 3. Let's have it, shall we, Jessi? This is at Pokies21. How proud are you ladies as to where the tour is going? Jessi?
Oh, so proud. Like, I mean, I don't even think that if anyone had told me when I was a young kid, or when I was competing, that the tour would be in this space, and that like surfing would be a leader in equality and gender equality, I would have just been like, you're dreaming. Like we've come, like it's amazing how far we've come, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I mean, for me, we've had 2 stops on tour, and I've cried at both of them now, just because like the moments that we've experienced have been so huge. Like it has just been such an amazing year, and just reflecting on, you know, I look back at Carissa Moore and like Sally and Courtney, and we've known these girls like since they were like 8 years old, and now they're like looking at the shoes that they're filling and the goals that they've achieved. So incredibly inspired by the tour. Thank you for your question, and yeah, excited about where the tour is going. Next question at Jessi Giglio. I'm so bad at the names here. At Jessi Giglio. What are you most excited about for the future?
I really want to see a backflip. Yeah, I'm putting it out there. Like that's I'm excited about that.
Okay. Gauntlet has been set, the backflip for Jessi. I'm excited. The future, I think even just this next event, I mean, Portugal staring it in the face. It's probably going to be some of the opening rounds as this goes to air. So I'm even just excited for what's right in front of me. So those events, I think the mid-year cut's going to be exciting. Yeah. And a little bit heartbreaking. And then obviously the WSL finals this year with the way that the rankings have been shaken up. So that's what I'm looking forward to. At Chris Holly, since Moana is currently ranked number 3, is she going to get a wild card for the next stops?
So the way that Moana can get into these events, which is actually the same way that Barron and Kaio are getting into these events, are as an injury replacement, because the wild cards are always allocated to, you know, certain things. Whether it's a sponsor or in the women's this time, T is going to be in there as part of the Ultimate Surfer prize when she had won 3 wildcard entrants into an event. So basically, and not that Moana would ever want anyone to be injured, but it would need to be an injury or someone just, you know, taking a leave of absence or something. So T is in there right now as a wild card that's attached to the Ultimate Surfer prize. And then in the rule book, there's one replacement that's there to in case of any injury, which is Bronte. So Bronte's taking Caroline's spot. So when you look at the men's tour and we see that, you know, Barron and Kaio are in, it's because we've got so many injuries right now. Like we've got Iago out, we've got Liam O'Brien out, we've got Carlos Muniz. So they're taking one of those spots while we still have local wildcards, you know, for Portugal. There's a local wildcard and there's also a wildcard for one of our sponsors. So it depends. That's a very long way of saying it depends on everyone's health and how everyone is going coming into Australia. So it's not out of the question that Moana could potentially be in any one of these next events, but it is going to depend on the health of everyone else.
Okay, Jessi, well, thanks for answering our Instagram questions. And now we're going to move into the lightning round. So these are 10 questions and you have to answer as fast as you can. So Jessi, one board setup for the rest of your life: single fin, twin fin, thruster, quad, bonza, finless.
Twin fin.
Nice. Coffee or tea?
Coffee. I mean, tea's useless.
You're definitely a big fan of the caffeine. Burrito or pizza?
Probably pizza, I think.
Last book you read?
I read Cersei, but I also read the Uber book, Super Pumped. That's next level. You should definitely read that.
I'll get into it. Okay, best surf film ever?
Sabotage, by far.
Nice. One wave you never have to go back to?
Oh, God. I feel like I've got a couple of waves that I just, like, hated. Oh, this is terrible. I don't know. And then I feel bad because I'm like, what if I do have to go back? God. I don't know. Something really cold. You know what? Actually, one wave, I went to Iceland. I never have to go back. I loved, I mean, in terms of surfing, I'd love to go back to just go to Iceland, but I never have to go surfing again in Iceland. I've never been so cold in my whole life.
So you've ticked that box. You can go enjoy the scenery and the atmosphere for that. That's fair enough. Yeah. Okay, you only get to surf one wave for the rest of your life.
I reckon it's Rocky Point, which is terrible.
That's a fun wave.
Yeah, I love Rockies.
It's left, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm only going left, but.
These two get very, very interesting. Best person to share a lineup with?
You know, to be honest, I don't mind surfing by myself sometimes, but I do enjoy surfing with my sisters, otherwise known as the twins, as long as they don't hassle me too much.
So you're saying that the next time we're at a WSL event and you're on a peak by yourself, the whole broadcast team shouldn't just paddle out and sit right next to you?
Do it. Come
on. This probably leads quite nicely into the next question. Worst person to share a lineup with?
Oh, for sure. Look, you know what I've noticed, honestly, every professional surfer can catch a wave from 40 feet away. Like, that some of the men, I'm like, he's never going to catch that. And I'm like, how? How did you get it? Like, I mean, if you want to get waves, but having said that, I do love like a chat in the water. So I'm all about coming out. I just won't get any waves. But it's amazing the waves that crew catch. It's unbelievable. I'm like, do you have a motor? Yeah.
Yeah, web gloves.
Yeah. It's heavy.
Okay. So, Jessi, this is the final question. Finish the sentence. I will next achieve a state of happiness by.
Don't know. I mean, is it wrong that I want to say going and getting another coffee? Because that's generally what I'm thinking.
So hanging up on us and getting another, what's the go-to, flat white?
No, I'm like a double piccolo person, like the little small ones. Small maximum
Nice.
caffeine, little amount of milk.
Well, Jessi, thank you so much for joining the Lineup podcast. We are super stoked to have you on this episode. And like I said, we'll be airing this episode on March 8th, which is International Women's Day. So thank you so much for your time.
No worries. Thanks, guys, for having me. Thanks, Rose.
Shot, Jessi.